Thanks, Mr. Chair, and hello to the witnesses. Perhaps what we can do is you can finish off your answer there, and then I'll have my set of questions for you. So I'm wondering if you can finish Mr. Small's, the answers to Mr. Small's question.
Sorry, what was the question again, Mr. Small? If you could just repeat that for 1 second.
Thank you. Mr. Burnell, my question was, could the offshore fleet been given an allocation under the auspice of a stewardship fishery that would be a scientific experimental quota that would supplement the trawl survey, and to have the fishery remain as a stewardship fishery versus going commercial?
So this stock is now a stock that's in the cautious zone of the precautionary approach framework, and every other example of any fishery in Atlantic Canada that I'm aware of, maybe Canada as a whole, that's in the cautious zone, is considered a commercial fishery. It's the second largest biomass in Atlantic Canada, third largest cod stock in the world. So for those reasons, I think it would be a commercial fishery. Technically, could it happen? I suppose technically it could happen, but the probability of that happening is very low. Probability of it having happened would be very low, and just based on history and other practice, generally, fishery in the cautious zone is a commercial fishery.
Okay. Thanks for that. In terms of the trawling practices over the last 40 years, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, how do they differ specifically from today?
Well, a number of things. The volume fished obviously has changed massively. Pre-moratorium on northern cod, we were over 100,000 metric tons of cod probably harvested at times by the offshore sector, and a sizable portion harvested by the inshore sector as well. The number of vessels that are used today, we have 2 offshore groundfish boats in our fleet, basically. The management measures in place today are nothing like they were a generation ago. We have 100% observer coverage, independent coverage on our boat. We have dockside monitoring. We have daily hail requirements. Our vessels are monitored. When we land, we're inspected, which we welcome those sorts of measures as well. There are marine protected areas to protect sensitive habitat today that weren't in place pre-moratorium. We fish about 2% in Atlantic Canada. We come into contact with about 2% of the marine environment. And a lot of our key fisheries like redfish, it's less than 1%. Yellowtail flounder, less than 1%. So we're coming into contact, and these are sandy and rocky bottom environments. People have this image that we're out fishing coral and pristine environments. That's not the case. And that's the case. Look to Iceland. I'll come back to Iceland on a regular basis. They take well over 100,000 metric tons every year, the same kind of technology that we use, and they've had a sustainable fishery for a generation. It works because they have good management measures, they have good structures, they have protections, closures. Some of the measures that have been adopted here through NAFO and domestically now that Mr. Burns spoke to. We have a 10-week spatial closure that'll run from mid-April through to the end of June. That's in place. We have a minimum fish size of 43 centimeters. We have, which is 2 centimeters larger than the European standard. We have mesh size in our trawl of 155 millimeter diamond mesh. I think the standard in Europe is 130 millimeter. All of these measures, where we are today, virtually none of those were in place pre-moratorium. So it is a different ball game altogether in terms of how you would look at trawl-based fisheries today.
Thank you for that, because I think that's a key item that has been brought up so far in terms of the offshore and the picture, as you put it, a perception that the offshore is going out to the water, the vessels are going out, and it's going to be the 1970s and 80s again. And what you're saying is that through and through practices have changed. Technology has changed. Due diligence has changed, right? I want to go to the economic benefits of the cod fishery as it relates to the offshore. And this is for all 3. What are the economic benefits from supply chain to people employed on vessels, processing plants, things of that nature? Because when you talk about a fair and balanced approach, I wonder if you can get to some actual numbers that you have or projected numbers that you will have in relation to the cod fishery as it relates to the offshore fishery.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with, I guess, on the processing side. So last year at Icewater in Arnold's Cove, we worked 26 full weeks on 2 shifts, or the equivalent of 52 weeks a year. The most employment provided for a plant in Newfoundland that focuses on producing wet fish or frozen at-sea raw material. 50% of that was locally caught inshore cod. 50% was frozen at sea, imported from Norway. This year, our goal is to not import any from Norway with the quota given to the offshore and to the indigenous Aboriginal groups in Labrador. So we would produce as much local cod as we can, and then the what's so key about frozen at sea, and I don't think I heard the first hearing, I think people didn't quite understand it. So OCI catches the fish, they produce it frozen at sea, they bring it in, and then we can decide when we produce it. So that allows us to work, 26 or more weeks this year. We should have more employment in Arnold's Cove with the frozen at sea raw material. In the inshore season, you have to buy it when it's being landed. If you don't buy it, it goes somewhere else. And I mean, as was said, I mean, the majority of the inshore landing was caught in 7 weeks. There is still some quota on cod in the inshore. They're trying to get it caught right now. There was 150 tons. The fishery was reopened twice since the September 27th initial closure, and we're still catching cod in 3K, 3L today. The 2J part for Labrador, that was closed. The allocation was taken up there, but it's still open in 3K, 3L.
Right. So in terms of employment, Mr. Wareham and Ms. Lapointe and Mr. Bonnell, actual numbers in terms of people, Newfoundlanders working, I think is a key thing to highlight, because at the end of the day, this is about Newfoundland and Labrador, an iconic species, a gateway to economic development. What numbers are we dealing with, the actual people that will be employed as a result of the change in question?
We have in Arnold's Cove right now, this year, we have 250 people working. And 230 of them are local. They're all within an hour's radius. 25 or so were temporary foreign workers, the first time we've ever had to do that this year, which we did. Payroll last year was $7 million, and this year will be higher than that with our input of inshore cod. So significant for a community of 1,000 people. We've been the largest employer in the town since 1979, the largest taxpayer in the town since 1979, the largest producer of inshore cod since the cod fishery started to reopen in Newfoundland in 2006.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kellaway. A little bit over. We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to witnesses for being here today. I know that everyone agrees about the fact that the fisheries economy, in particular cod fisheries, has been very much waiting for this moratorium to be lifted. Are you ready for this reopening in terms of processors and organisations? Have you been preparing for this reopening of North Cod for a long time?
Maybe turn things over to Alberto. Yeah, I mean, we invested, as I indicated in my opening comments, we invested in the MV Calvert, a new vessel, $60 million investment, 80 crew members basically on a two-shift basis for this vessel for ground fish, including cod. So, we fish yellowtail flounder a portion of the year, redfish a portion of the year, but it was envisioned to be a vessel that would be available in a reopened cod fishery as well. And that vessel is preparing now. We're putting a small investment in the factory of the vessel, but it's preparing to fish cod later this fall and through the winter. And yeah, certainly we've been preparing, and we're certainly prepared for it. And there will be significant employment generated as a result on the harvesting side. You may wish to speak to the processing side.
Yeah, I would just add in Arnold's Cove, I guess, as I said in my opening remarks, we've been preparing since 1992 for this moment to come back. Spent $14 million between 2018 and 2020 to give us the latest state-of-the-art equipment so that we can compete with the best in the world, which we do.
Merci de votre réponse.
Thank you for that answer. So you were basically anticipating that there was going to be this reopening. You saw an improvement in the biomass, or did you have other information?
Well, I can speak. The information that we would have had on cod was the information that's been presented in the fall survey from last year, obviously, and that the stock has moved from the critical zone to the cautious zone of the precautionary approach framework. So we've been monitoring the stock for the last, many years, and we've seen some encouraging signs, obviously, but we follow the best available science. So no, we weren't preparing to go fishing a couple of years ago with a stock in the critical zone necessarily, but with the change now to the cautious zone of the PA framework with a very cautious harvest rate of 5%, we're excited about the opportunity ahead of us this year, and we're hopeful for a continuation and continued improvement of the resource in the years to come.
Je vous ai entendu dire tantôt aussi que vous aviez bien...
You were saying earlier that, of course, fishery was just having a small impact on biomass compared to climate change and other predators as well. We're aware of that issue. Do you think that in any case, cod and its biomass will continue to improve, or if you fish by default and say, well, climate change is here and predators are here, and they're going to alter the biomass more than our fishery activities, so that's why you're deciding to fish come hell or high water.
The good thing about northern cod and some of our other fisheries is that we have an annual survey completed on the stock. One of the things that hasn't been covered in the hearings here, I think, that we've talked about a lot in the advisory process is that last year's survey was conducted about a month earlier than normal. The general feeling both amongst DFO science, upon industry, and those around the table is that the actual biomass is in all likelihood larger than was picked up in the survey this past year because it went out much earlier than the normal time series, and the fish migrate in the fall, migrate offshore a little later in the year. So we are hopeful with the survey that's ongoing right now this fall, we'll get a really good picture and a true picture of the state of the resource. We are of the view that the resource is probably stronger than indicated, but we also saw some really strong indicators in the survey, as Ms. Lapointe touched on in her opening comments, related to recruitment and other things.
Excusez-moi, j'ai pas beaucoup de temps. Il me reste 2
Sorry, I
minutes.
don't have much time, just 2 minutes, in fact. When you're representatives of offshore fishery, and you know the history of cod like everyone else. You know that offshore vessels have quite aggressive fishery techniques when it comes to the impact on biomass. You say that you've improved your techniques. How can you improve the offshore vessel techniques that carry out massive fishing activities? Are there new technologies that we're not aware of that you're using?
Of new technologies. But what I will say about the past is, in the past, the major issue was overfishing. Both foreign, domestic, inshore, offshore, we had significant overfishing. As I mentioned, we had exploitation rates in excess of 50% leading up to the moratorium. We're talking about a fishery today with an exploitation rate of 5%, with management and conservation measures that are far more advanced than they ever were in the past. We'll stand behind mobile gear fishing, within Canada and globally as a responsible, sustainable form of food production. All forms of production. We could spend a session here talking about gill nets, the pros and cons of gill nets, which have a lot of negative connotations as well. But if done right, can be managed correctly. The same with trawl-based fishing. The technology, the techniques, the approach, the management measures are far greater today than they were ever in the past. And I'd stand by that.
Merci beaucoup. Il me reste un petit 30 secondes.
Thank you very much. I've just got 30 seconds. Ms. Lapointe, are you aware of the fact that cod biomass is improving for some time? Have you seen this improve recently, or have you seen this for some time, this improvement in the biomass? Thank you for the question. When we look at the data, there's an improvement in the biomass recruitment since 2020, and with the assessment that was carried out last fall by the DFO to change the reference point level with data they've integrated into their analysis. This has shown that the stock has in fact been the cautious zone since 2016. So as Mr. Bonnell said, we follow these analyses and the scientific assessments from the department that take place for this fishery every year.